Music. Richard Kensington was a man who never let emotions dictate his actions. A self-made billionaire, he had built his vast empire from the ground up. Every dollar he earned was a testament to his unwavering determination, sharp instincts, and relentless ambition. His name commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe. His business decisions, always calculated, precise, admired by many, yet feared by some. But none of that truly mattered to Richard. What he cherished above all else was his son, Dorian. From the very moment Dorian was born, he became Richard's greatest pride and joy. Richard poured all his dreams into him, making sure he had the finest education, the best mentors, and every opportunity possible. This empire, Richard hadn't built it for himself alone. No, he had done it with the hope that Dorian would one day step in, carry it forward, and honor his legacy. Dorian was at the very core of Richard's world. But over time, things began to change. Richard watched, heart heavy, as his son grew more and more distant. The love and care Richard had always given him met with cold indifference. The humble and grateful young man Richard had once known had transformed, arrogant, entitled, uninterested in values like loyalty, integrity, and hard work. Richard could barely recognize the person Dorian had become, and the pain of it ran deep. One evening, as Richard sat alone in his study, staring out the window, a chilling thought crept into his mind. Had he failed as a father? Had the very wealth he had fought so hard to build poisoned his son's heart? This idea took hold, and Richard knew he had to find out the truth. He wouldn't ask Dorian with words. No, he would test him through action. After much contemplation, Richard made a drastic decision. He would disappear. He would leave behind everything, his mansion, his wealth, even his own name. He would live as an ordinary man, fading into the background, just to see if Dorian would care enough to come looking for him. An extreme test. Absolutely. But Richard felt there was no other way. The next morning he packed a small duffel bag, only the essentials and a little cash. As he stepped out of the mansion, he hesitated, taking in the sight of the life he had built. For the first time in years, he felt clarity. This was something he had to do. For weeks, Richard wandered the streets, far removed from the world of luxury he had once known. His once impeccable suits, now worn and tattered. His once polished shoes, now scuffed beyond recognition. He slept in shelters, ate whatever little he could afford, and faded into complete anonymity. No longer was he Richard Kensington, the billionaire businessman. Now, he was just another face in the crowd. From a distance, Richard observed Dorian. His son continued to bask in luxury, driving high-end cars, dining at exclusive restaurants, living the life Richard had built for him. Occasionally, Richard caught glimpses of him through windows or overheard whispers of his latest exploits. One thing was clear. Dorian hadn't seemed to miss the wealth his father had provided. But had he missed his father? That Richard wasn't so sure. One evening, Richard stood outside a high-end restaurant where Dorian frequently dined with executives. Hidden across the street, he watched as his son strolled in, laughing effortlessly with his colleagues. A sharp pain gripped Richard's chest, but still he remained in the shadows. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage, Richard stepped inside the restaurant. The elegant decor, the crisp linens, the hushed voices, it all reminded him of the world he had left behind. Approaching the hostess stand, he asked for a seat. But as her eyes swept over his disheveled appearance, her expression hardened. "I'm sorry, sir," she said curtly. "We don't have seating available for someone like you." Richard's stomach twisted. He had grown used to this kind of treatment. but that didn't make it hurt any less. Swallowing his pride, he tried again. "Please. It's been a long day." But the hostess didn't budge. As Richard turned to leave, his eyes landed on Dorian, carefree, laughing, completely at ease in the company of his colleagues. A pang of sadness struck him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward and called out, "Dorian!" Dorian turned, his expression shifting, first confusion, then something colder. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice sharp. Richard's heart sank. But steadying himself, he answered, "It's me. Your father." Dorian's gaze flickered over Richard's weathered face, scanning him without a hint of recognition. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he replied, "I don't have time for this. Leave." The cold dismissal shattered Richard. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Leaving the restaurant, Richard felt crushed. His own son's indifference had shattered him. In the days that followed, Richard drifted through a haze, coming to terms with a painful truth. Dorian hadn't just failed the test. He had failed him as a son. Determined to take action, Richard reached out to his lawyer, Marcus, instructing him to drastically reduce Dorian's inheritance, just enough for survival, but not for luxury. Marcus hesitated. "Richard, I've stood by your side for years. But this is unheard of." Still, he agreed. But Richard wasn't done. He hired a private investigator, Olivia, to dig into Dorian's affairs. What she uncovered. Devastating. Dorian had been involved in shady dealings, manipulating clients, betraying trusted colleagues. He wasn't just selfish, he was corrupt. Heartbroken, Richard knew there was only one thing left to do. He had to confront his son. One last time. Summoning Dorian to the mansion, Richard watched as his son arrived. That usual arrogant swagger, gone. In its place, unease. Gesturing to the dining table, Richard spoke, his voice steady yet laced with pain. "You failed me. I gave you everything," he continued, "and you threw it all away." Dorian's voice rose defensively. "I built my success. I worked for it." "No," Richard cut him off. "You were handed everything, and you betrayed not just me, but the values I raised you with." Sliding a folder across the table, Richard let the weight of the moment sink in. Inside, legal documents severing Dorian from the family fortune. Dorian's face paled as he skimmed through the papers. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I already have," Richard replied, his voice cracking. "This is the last lesson I will ever teach you. From here on out, build your own life." Furious, Dorian stormed out, vowing never to return. Months passed. His ventures collapsed. Friends abandoned him. And for the first time in his life, Dorian was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Alone. One rainy night, he stood outside the mansion gates, staring at the life he had lost. The wealth, the luxury, none of it mattered anymore. What he truly missed was his father's love, his guidance. But it was too late. In that moment, Dorian realized, true wealth had never been in money or power. It had always been in family, in integrity, in love. As he turned and walked away, regret gnawed at him. The road ahead, it would be hard. But for the first time, he was ready to walk it alone. If this story opened your eyes with its unexpected twists, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful narratives that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Stay tuned for more stories of transformation and lessons learned the hard way.